like if you're interested in Catholic social teaching and economics. I tried to get him to come to Hasbro to speak, but ran out of money.
Everybody else is still out there, should they be?
Yeah, they're waiting for dinner.
Okay. Are we driving them there or something?
I don't know what they're doing.
Probably.
Okay.
Possibly.
All right, so again, where did the...
Yeah, present.
Present. All right.
Okay. And this is already good? Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, I am delighted to introduce to you the 4 figures that I've spent the last year and a half with. And they kind of direct my research, kind of difficult to see here, but Homo economicus, a little girl named Annabelle, the philosopher Aristotle, and finally Aquinas and the popes of Catholic social teaching. Really progressed my research. To start, you may be familiar with Homo economicus, definitely Dr. Sayer is. He's the central agent, he, she, whatever, this is how we abstract human beings in economics, and it's the central agent in the rational consumer choice model. So we have to make a few assumptions. That man is rational, self-interested, and has stable preferences or utility. And when I was first introduced to this idea as a student, I was like, okay, well, you know, I think a lot of people are unsettled by this, and you look inside yourself and can see why. But it is helpful in predicting many behaviors. But in my intermediate class, we were introduced to Frank, who acknowledged that a more balanced view, there are some sub-disciplines in economics that are trying to incorporate and account for why we do things that are irrational, why are we altruistic, why do we run into burning buildings, things that you couldn't predict in a model. But what other research he had conducted with some of his colleagues, Gilowich and Reagan, he was questioning, well, does this model lead to economic scholars being more self-interested? And what he found was, you know, when they used the research design, that it turned out that the economists were acting more opportunistically. But that wasn't just the most important point, that first-year economist students in the beginning were subjected to the design, but then at the end they were subjected to the same design, and in fact throughout the course of the year they started to exhibit more opportunistic behaviors. I think that it's these 3 points in Smith's model, in his assumptions about human nature, that we're predominantly self-interested, but that we're social creatures and that we're motivated by competition. I think that we've tended, the rational choice model in using the Homo economicus focuses a lot on A, and so I wanted to think about and explore the other 2 points, but also it's not really important. You might say, well, economists are just more efficient. Is this so bad that they're acting opportunistically? And so that led me to think more about happiness. And so a girl, Annabelle, because I asked a girl that I was babysitting, well, Annabelle, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she told me, a billionaire. Well, why? And she said, I don't know. And so it kind of troubled me, because I was like, well, what are we searching for? What are we striving for? And Mill said that political economy doesn't treat the whole of man's nature, but that it's only concerned with this being that solely desires to possess wealth. And I, again, was troubled by this, so I wanted to know, well, in seeking this income and striving after this, you know, does this lead us to be happier and more productive? You know, what is it? And so this entire field of economic research and behavioral economics first started with Easterlin in the 70s, and he was quantifying overall life satisfaction, and found that while life satisfaction is a necessary component of, while income quality is a necessary component for quality of life. It's not sufficient. So there are other, which we all know. I mean, you don't, just because you're wealthy doesn't mean you're happy. But then that led to, open the doors to many other people being able to actually quantify life satisfaction, which is distinguished from situational pleasure. So again, this was repeated, we find the repeated player. Some other economists studied the qualitative differences in leisure time and how not just how much time we take, but how we spend that time matters. And this particularly Canal and earlier in 2008 we're looking at is Homo economicus happier? And
No.
of course found no, that traits like cooperation, altruism, these are components of happy people. But that doesn't necessarily prove that being altruistic or being compassionate makes you happy, until we had this panel research, 25 years of data from Headley, Muffet, and Wagner, found that over time these choices do matter, that they're not just biological traits. We don't have a set point. They really focused on debunking the set point theory, that we were just biologically programmed to have some level of happiness, and you may have periods where you deviate from that, but in the end you were kind of destined to be whatever happiness was. Curiously, Carol Graham, who's also done a lot of research in economics, found that not only was income not a sufficient condition, but at some point it started to decrease happiness. She found a U-shaped curve. So, as you can imagine, if you're extremely poor, you're going to be extremely unhappy, and your happiness will progress as you gain income and wealth. But what she also found was that decline past a certain point, which in the science of equilibrium brings us to this idea of balance. And balance is exactly what Aristotle was concerned with ethics. That's what ethics is. It's balance. It's this midpoint. It's the golden mean between two extremes. So in economics we don't talk about ethics because it's positive science, and ethics are seen to be normative because it is what you should be, not what you should do, which is distinct from morals, which is doing right and wrong. But it is this Greek ideal based on an ideal character trait. But it's an active practice, it's a habit. It's not something that is just given. This is what Aristotle, you had to work towards an ethic. It's a virtue. And in my research, I came across other economists who have advocated for introducing ethics back into economics, but find that speculate that possibly the reason that it's left out, besides it being normative, look at the philosophical progression through just the study of economics, and largely speculate that this association between Aristotle and religion makes people wary to accept ethics, virtue ethics, which are in fact ubiquitous and not subject to any faith. It's an objective value. So what I wanted to then look at was this difference between happiness and overall life satisfaction, these components that Aristotle was talking about, and look at Catholic social teaching and how these virtues were applied in that particular faith. By no means is that the only faith that has talked about ethics. In fact, many of the writers who influenced the popes in their teaching were comparing things like Buddhism and Judaism, and just this ideal of better humanity. So I don't think that it's offensive for anyone in that it's not a religious ideal or a moral practice. It's this objective good and evil, which in Catholic social teaching, it is about this balance. This idea of solidarity is the balance between individualism and collectivism, which seeks to pursue man's good, but with the idea of his community, which some of the principles that the Pope advocated throughout were cooperative enterprise. Subsidiarity is just the principle that those closest to the problem should govern themselves. They have the most information. That's an economic concept. That's going to be the most efficient outcome, is the one that has the most information about the circumstance. Stewardship, the idea of thinking into the future, not just considering the here and now, because stewardship involves the environment, but that requires a responsibility that's not innate in rational thinking as far as maximizing. In order to think about that, that requires the concept of an ideal and a further vision. So introducing these things are not in the classical sense of economics in the study. When we just look at Homo economicus, the doors have to be opened a bit from the positivism to introduce things like this. But many scholars have shown that there's movement towards introducing a broader concept of well-being. We've recognized, with behavioral economics in these studies, that income is not the only thing that improves the human lot. That there's room for this to be reintroduced. And like I said, by no means is this just limited to the Catholic faith, but as the Pope said, it was about opening this dialogue between ethics and all other disciplines, that these are universal ideals. And the global economic ethic was started at one of the UN rounds, and I think it's evidence of moving towards that, at least studying what are universal, returning to studying what are universal economic ethics, and what do we all agree can improve humans. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Erin.
So I have to ask you.
Even though
I
I get to go first,
oh,
you
okay. You should go first.
All right. Okay. So let's go ahead and get this off. Very specific yet, I think, broad question. If someone heard about your work and said, you should really talk to the new World Bank president, because they have all this money that they're going to try to spend on developing economies, because they have this idea that they want to make people better off. Mm-hmm. What would you inform them, him or her, about what they really should be doing based upon your research and what you view the role of economics? So what's the World Bank getting wrong, and how would you set them aright?
Oh, okay. Goes back to economic problems.
Yeah.
This whole aid question. Yeah. I don't think that there's mounting evidence on either side of the debate. I mean, because I've studied people like Sachs and the Eastern Wing, who argued and had evidence for times that aid has helped and that it's actually hurt countries. I think that each culture and a lot of that is what Phelps was arguing, is that there's no overarching model that you can just apply and say that it works as far as an economic system, but it matters the cultural norms. But that doesn't deny the pursuit of an ethic of considering more than just increasing GDP. So I mean, if you're looking at a project that is going to set up a factory and, you know, it may create all these jobs, but I just, as an economist, hope to look at all the other aspects and not just increase production.
I mean, is there something specific that you think that they're getting specifically wrong that they could do better at? So not focusing on GDP, okay, then focus on what?
I mean, I don't know if that's building communities. I think that I think that's difficult that's a very broad concept, but looking at the social capital and seeing, is this going to develop a community, or does this, while cooperation is good, I think that, again, it comes down to subsidiarity, that the people need to have the autonomy to decide what they're doing in their lives. So, I mean, if you look at the project, what comes to mind is economic development in the Ivory Coast, where Nestle was going in and helping farmers with their cocoa products. That you may provide them with tips and training, but it has to be community driven. It has to be small. And I think that's a lot what Sachs argues, is that going this top down, like trying to apply this overarching development plan and not hearing from the people, like, what do you want? You know, not just what you want, but what's your vision? And that's why I think a goal is important. This goal is this idea of what kind of a community do you want to become? That matters.
In 375, one day, beginning of class, we talked about those new kinds of firms, the socially responsible.
Yes.
Would that be something that you